On November 23, 1987, a strange and heavy silence surrounded a newly fixed-up home on Ransom Street in Holland, Michigan. Rick Brink, a trusted worker, didn't show up for his job at the Trenway Furniture Factory. His boss started to worry. Phone calls to Rick's parents, Garrett and Ida, made everyone feel scared. Something was very wrong. They drove to the house without talking much. When they saw Rick's Chevrolet Blazer in the driveway, they felt a little hopeful. Maybe he had just slept late. Maybe it was nothing serious. But that hope quickly disappeared. Inside the car, Rick was slumped over with bullet wounds. His head was resting against the door. The scene was terrible. When police officers from Ottawa County went inside the house, they found Gail, Rick's 22-year-old wife, in the main bedroom. A pillow covered her face. Under it were 3 gunshot wounds fired very close to her. The young couple, who had been full of life and dreams just hours before, had been killed. At first, police thought maybe Rick had killed Gail and then himself. But that idea fell apart. The .22 caliber handgun was missing. Someone else had been there. Someone careful. Someone who left behind an almost perfect crime scene. For 27 years, the murder of Gail and Rick Brink troubled Ottawa County. 2 lives ended too soon. 2 families searching for answers that never came. Before we continue this shocking story, take a second to hit subscribe and like this video. Your support helps bring these forgotten stories to light, and you won't miss any future uploads. The deaths of the Brinks were not just a local tragedy. They were the first piece in uncovering decades of secrets in a small Michigan town. In 2013, a cold case team found a suspect. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a drifter. It was someone Gail loved. Someone who was supposed to protect her. Someone who had twisted love into a terrible obsession. This case shows how families never gave up. It shows how detectives refused to let files sit and gather dust. It shows how modern investigation methods gave voice to victims who had been silenced for so long. The community was changed forever. Fear spread through Ottawa County like a cold wind off Lake Michigan. Neighbors watched neighbors suspiciously. The hidden darkness beneath small-town life was revealed. And it would crack wide open when the truth came out 27 years later. The most frightening fact? The key suspect had been interviewed in the original investigation, but slipped away for decades. They attended community gatherings. They looked the parents in the eye, and they hid unimaginable secrets behind a mask of innocence. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. I'm always interested to see how far these stories travel and how they connect us across distances. Today we'll walk through what happened in November 1987. We'll trace decades of questions that had no answers, and we'll reveal the breakthrough that finally brought a twisted form of justice to Gail and Rick Brink. This is a story of loss, never giving up, lies, and finally justice that was delayed but not forgotten. Ottawa County, Michigan in 1987 felt like a place where everyone still knew their neighbors. With just over 200,000 people living in towns like Holland, right by Lake Michigan, it was a community built on trust. People often left their doors unlocked at night. Kids rode their bikes from morning until the streetlights came on, and nobody worried much about it. It was the kind of area where families settled down, built their lives, and truly believed in the safety and good nature of their towns. This was the world Gail Weirden grew up in. She was a young woman whose drive and plans for the future stood out brightly. Gail, born in 1965, came from a big family with lots of love but not much extra money. The Weirden house was usually loud and packed with 8 kids, full of close energy that money couldn't buy. But Gail wanted more. From the time she was little, she told her older sister Cheryl she would work as hard as needed for the life she imagined. She had ambition, and she had a way with people that helped her get ahead. As a teenage waitress, she would flash her smile, tell a quick joke, and the tips would come rolling in. She was naturally bright, someone who made a room feel more alive. Her looks drew a lot of attention, both good and bad. Luckily, she had her older brother Ryan often nearby. He was solid and self-assured, 2.5 years older. He seemed to think it was his job to look out for her. He and Cheryl formed an informal guard around their sister, an early warning system against any trouble that might try to get close. Trouble did come, first with a man named Lair. Their relationship was quick, intense, and eventually a mistake. They had even started building a house together, a life. But it felt shaky. Then in 1984, a contractor named Rick Brink, 25 years old and as steady as they come, walked into her workplace. The connection was immediate. Rick went home that day and told his mother he had just met the woman he was going to marry. Gail felt the same way. When she looked at Lair, she saw everything Rick wasn't. The breakup was rough. When Gail went to get her things, Lair slammed her hand in a drawer. The black eye he gave her was a violent final sign that their relationship was truly over. Ryan heard about it and paid Lair a visit. The message was delivered with fists. "Don't you ever touch my sister again." Just like that, Gail moved on. She and Rick started dating, and to anyone watching them, it was clear they were a perfect fit. Rick was the dependable partner she needed. He treated her well and encouraged her. They had the same goals: hard work, a family, a home where they could grow old. That summer, out on Lake Michigan in his boat, he taught her to water ski. Their laughter carried across the water. They looked like a picture-perfect couple, the kind you see in old photos and feel a touch of longing for. The future they believed was theirs. They married on April 25, 1986, the day after her 21st birthday. It was a small church ceremony with family, friends, and a reception by the lake where they danced like the future was a sure thing. They honeymooned under sunny skies, and when they returned, they were ready to start their big project. Rick's father, Garrett, found them the perfect fixer-upper, a foreclosed house on 20 acres on Ransom Street just outside Holland. The place was a mess, but Rick was a skilled craftsman, someone who trained other carpenters. He could see the potential in the old house, the future hidden beneath its neglect. They moved in that October, two young people with a dream and a sledgehammer. They filmed everything, scrubbing, painting, knocking down walls. It was their shared project, their shared life. By November, 18 months into their marriage, Gail was quietly telling Cheryl about their next big renovation, a nursery. The house on Ransom Street was finally ready for their long-term plans. They stood at the edge of everything they had worked for. The night of Saturday, November 21st, 1987, was a celebration. A high school friend of Rick's was getting married. They laughed and danced. Rick had a couple of beers. Gail was a little tipsy. They left around 11 p.m., driving home to the house they were building. Their car's taillights disappeared into the Michigan night. The strange quiet from the house on Ransom Street continued into Monday, November 23rd. Rick Brink's boss at the Trenway Furniture Factory, Jim Carlson, noticed Rick's empty workstation. Rick was dependable. He never just missed work. Jim called the house, but it just rang and rang. A bad feeling started to settle in his stomach. He called Rick's parents, Garrett and Ida. The news hit Garrett and Ida hard. Rick missing? It wasn't like him. A quick call to Gail's office at Donald Automotive confirmed she hadn't shown up either. The young couple, known for their strong work ethic, had simply vanished into the cold Michigan autumn. Jim Carlson drove out to Ransom Street with Rick's terrified parents. The first thing they saw offered a small bit of hope. Rick's Chevrolet Blazer was parked in the driveway. Maybe they were sick or had finally slept in, but that hope died the moment they got closer to the Blazer. Rick was slumped inside. The 28-year-old was down on the driver's side, his knees on the floorboards, his upper body leaning toward the passenger seat. His head rested against the door, and there was a dark, unmistakable bloodstain from gunshot wounds. The sight was horrible. Garrett and Ida didn't need to go inside the house to know something terrible had happened. Their dream for the young couple was over. They backed away and called the Ottawa County Sheriff's Department. The first police officers on the scene, including Detective Mark Jenkins, felt the weight of the silence as they entered the house. Jenkins, an experienced investigator with 15 years on the force, had seen plenty of ugly scenes, but the quiet orderliness here was particularly disturbing. They found Gail in the main bedroom. A pillow was over her face. When an officer carefully lifted it, they saw the rusty brown stain beneath. Gail had been shot 3 times in the face at very close range. It looked like an execution. At first, the grim thought among the first responders was murder-suicide. It was a common, if tragic, explanation for such violence. The idea was that Rick had killed his wife in anger, then himself. But that theory fell apart quickly. When they searched Rick's Blazer, the .22 caliber handgun, the weapon probably used, was missing. That detail changed everything. It meant there was a third person involved. The killer had walked away, taking the weapon and leaving a carefully cleaned, brutal scene. Rick had been shot twice in the left side of his head. There was a bullet hole in the passenger window, and the driver's side window was partly down. To Jenkins, it suggested Rick had opened the window to talk to someone he knew, someone he didn't feel threatened by in the moments before he was killed. The house itself offered few clues. There were no signs of a struggle, no forced entry. This wasn't a robbery. Cash sat visible on the kitchen counter next to their wallets. Gail's jewelry was undisturbed. 2 watches were left on her dresser. Both victims still wore their wedding rings. The only thing out of place was a small pile of clothes on the bedroom floor, as if tossed there before bed. The killer had been careful. No shell casings were found. The only bullets were still in the victims. He had picked up his casings, wiped surfaces clean, and vanished, leaving behind almost no physical evidence. The crime scene was strangely clean. No useful footprints, no clear handprints, no stray hairs or clothing fibers. Detectives managed to lift 6 fingerprints. 4 belonged to Rick and Gail. The other 2, one from the toilet, one from the phone, didn't match anyone in police databases. The time of death was estimated to be the early hours of Sunday, November 22nd, soon after they left the wedding party. Gail's brother Ryan later confirmed this, saying he'd tried calling his sister on Sunday and got no answer, just the empty ringing silence. Holland, a town known for its low crime rate, suddenly felt different. People started locking their doors. Mrs. Gable, who ran the flower shop on River Avenue, told a local reporter, "You never thought something like this could happen here. Now everyone's looking over their shoulder." Parents kept their children closer, a new wariness in their eyes. The unspoken question lingered. Was the killer someone they saw every day? The crime scene at the Brink home offered few answers. With almost no physical evidence, the investigation had to change direction. Officers began the slow, grinding work of talking to people in the community. They interviewed friends, family, and co-workers. They hoped for a crack in the young couple's seemingly perfect lives. Family members were among the first spoken to. Gail's older sister, Cheryl Weirden, shared her grief. She also shared a past worry. She spoke about Lair, Gail's ex-boyfriend. Cheryl told them about the ugly end of that relationship. There was the black eye. There was Gail's hand slammed in a drawer. Gail's brother Ryan had even confronted Lair with physical force. Many believed Lair had never truly gotten over Gail. The jealousy might have grown. He watched her build a happy life with Rick. It was a classic motive based on rejected passion. Investigators quickly tracked down Lair. He cooperated fully. He denied any involvement in the murders. He agreed to a lie detector test. The test results showed he was telling the truth. The most promising early lead had disappeared. Investigators found themselves back at the starting point. The double murder continued to grip Holland. A real fear settled over the community. Local newspapers ran daily updates. Frank Miller, the editor of the Holland Sentinel, noted a big change in town morale. "People here are used to quiet lives," Miller told a colleague. "Now every rumor feels like a threat. This case has changed how everyone sees their neighbor." Neighborhood watch groups formed overnight. Children, once free to roam, were kept under stricter watch. Days later, a surprising tip led investigators in a new direction. A man known locally as Shotgun Sid walked into the police station. He was the previous owner of the Ransom Street house. Sid was a well-known figure. He had known ties to a motorcycle gang. His influence reached from Detroit's rough streets to Holland's quieter corners. Sid admitted to dealing drugs and guns. However, he claimed a personal line against violence involving innocent people. He had become a federal informant. Sid presented a chilling theory. He believed the killers were looking for him. They didn't know the house had changed owners. Gail and Rick, in his view, were victims in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were caught in a gang war they knew nothing about. Investigators pursued this lead hard. They plunged into the underworld of Detroit biker gangs. They chased shadows for weeks. Officers interviewed known associates. They spoke to informants in the city. Sid also made his own calls. He tapped into his network for information. He tried to discover who might have wanted him dead. But the trail went cold. The rumors led nowhere. No solid evidence came up. Nothing tied the murders to the gang world. Even Sid eventually doubted his own theory. The investigation hit another big dead end. Then on Christmas Eve, another horrible discovery shocked the community. Deborah Wilson, age 30, was reported missing. Her husband returned home from a party. He found the lights blazing. The sliding door to their backyard field was wide open. His father searched the field. He found Deborah's body in the dark. She had been brutally stabbed to death. Her throat was slashed. The closeness of this new murder was alarming. Deborah Wilson's house was only half a mile from the Brink home. She had attended the same high school as Rick. They were the same age. The connection seemed too strong to ignore. Investigators felt a cold dread. Was a serial killer now operating in their small corner of Holland? The speculation ignited a new, more terrifying theory. The Ottawa County Sheriff's Department looked back at older cases. The ghost of a 10-year-old murder rose from the files. It was the 1977 murder of 20-year-old Deborah Polinsky. She was stabbed multiple times in her bedroom. Her home was less than a mile away. 3 murders. 2 victims named Deborah, all within a tight area, all tragically unsolved. The fear in Holland grew stronger. Residents who once left their doors unlocked now secured them twice over. Fear was no longer a distant threat. It was something you could feel. Parents kept their children close. Many in the community looked at every neighbor with suspicion. They wondered if a monster walked among them. But an investigation relies on evidence. It cannot survive on fear or guessing alone. Despite the interesting geography and grim similarities, investigators found no real thread. There was no matching pattern, no credible witness, no forensic link connecting the 3 cases. Each case stood alone. One by one, the files on Deborah Wilson and Deborah Polinsky, along with the Brink double homicide, were closed. They were put away in cardboard boxes in the records room. All good leads were used up. The hope that had once burned so brightly in the hearts of the families began to dim. It faded into a grim acceptance. For the Ottawa County Sheriff's Department, the unsolved Brink case became a heavy burden. It was a constant reminder of failure. Sheriff Thomas Riley, a man who prided himself on solving local crimes, felt the pressure deeply. He understood the public's frustration. He met regularly with the Brink and Weirden families. He offered condolences. He repeated the department's commitment. But without new evidence, his words felt hollow, even to himself. The case effectively went quiet. It joined the growing number of cold files in the county. Years passed. The community slowly adapted to its new uneasy reality. The Brink murders became a hushed story. It was a local legend. Children grew up hearing about the young couple who disappeared into the Michigan night. For Gail and Rick's families, however, the wound remained open. Garrett and Ida Brink found little comfort. Gail's sister Cheryl often spoke of Gail. She kept her memory alive. They refused to let the case be forgotten. They held small memorial gatherings. They spoke to any reporter who would listen. They were a persistent, grieving voice. They searched for answers for decades. By the early 2000s, Holland was a different place. The original investigators had retired. Some had passed away. New technologies offered new possibilities. In 2009, a new unit formed within the Ottawa County Sheriff's Department. Its purpose was specific and grim: to reopen dormant cases. The cold case unit was established. 2 detectives were assigned to this new unit. They were Dave Blakely and Venus Rapper. They came from downstate. They were outsiders. They were unburdened by old loyalties. They had no preconceived notions. They brought fresh eyes to cases steeped in old pain. Detective Rapper often spoke of the advantage of time. Loyalties change, she would say. Friendships change. People hiding secrets back then often don't feel the need to keep them, or they've held that secret so long they want to get it off their chest. The cold case unit began its work methodically. They started with the 2 Deborahs. These were the unsolved murders from 1977 and 1987. Both cases had unsettling closeness to the Brink homicide. Investigators hoped to find patterns. They looked for connections. They painstakingly reviewed every page of the original files. They re-examined old evidence. One of these cases saw progress. A suspect in the Deborah Wilson murder passed away. His death came with a confession. This confession closed the Wilson file. Then a crucial development happened in the Deborah Polinsky case. A new confession came forward. It led to the closure of that 20-year-old mystery. With these 2 older cases finally resolved, the unit's focus inevitably shifted. Their next task was the Brink double homicide. It remained the county's most well-known unsolved case. The cold case detectives began the tedious foundational work. They scoured every page of the original Brink investigation. Witness statements were reread. Alibis were rechecked. Every forgotten note was laid out under their fluorescent lights. They looked for overlooked details. They searched for subtle inconsistencies. They sought any crack in the perfect appearance of the Brinks' lives. That was when they saw it. A hairline fracture appeared in a long-held alibi. Gail's older brother, Ryan Weirden, was an early person of interest. He had claimed to be with his then-girlfriend Pam all night. Pam was now his wife. Their story from 1987 had been specific. It involved a failed trip to the laundromat. They then visited a friend named Rose's house to finish the wash. Finally, they went home for the night, but buried deep in the original files was a detail. It was a later lie detector test Pam had taken. When asked if she had been with Ryan all night, Pam had said no. This single inconsistency, overlooked for decades, now stood out sharply. It marked the first true crack in the wall of silence. In 2011, cold case investigators decided to revisit Ryan and Pam Weirden. They were a family of 6 now. They had been married for 23 years. Their lives were built over the foundation of that long-ago night. Ryan, now a stay-at-home dad, was the initial point of contact. His memory of the night over 2 decades ago was predictably foggy. This was a common response for a distant past. But the investigators' focus was shifting. It turned toward his wife, Pam. They arranged for her to come to the station for an interview. Ryan came with Pam to the station. He was a shadow of support. He even asked to sit in on her interview. Investigators firmly said no to this request. Pam's statement was an exact copy of her husband's. She repeated the story about the laundromat. She described a quiet night in. No new information came forward. No clarity came up on the nagging problem in their original alibi. For the investigators, this interview was a dead end, but their instincts told them otherwise. They were certain the couple was a locked box. They believed they held the key. They began to dig into who Ryan and Pam were back in 1987, and they uncovered a crucial detail. Ryan had been dating 2 women at the same time. Pam was the new girlfriend. The other was a woman named Crystal Van who went by Chris. The breakup had been friendly. They'd remained friends. Detectives tracked Chris down. The interview was winding down, giving nothing new. Blakely and Rapper were on their feet, ready to leave, when Chris stopped them. "Well, actually," she said, "there might be something else." The detective slowly sat back down, and the story that tumbled out changed the entire investigation. Chris told how, in the week after the murders, Ryan had wanted to drive by the death house on Ransom Street. She refused, the very idea giving her the creeps. Instead, they went to a park. There, under the trees, Ryan confessed that he and his sister Gail had a sexual relationship. He claimed it started when she was 9 and he was 12, and that it was agreed to until the last time when Gail said no and he forced himself on her. He had raped his sister. To the detectives, the notion of any agreement was a disgusting lie made up by a predator. A 9-year-old child cannot agree to such things. Gail had been her brother's victim long before she became someone else's. The horror deepened. Chris revealed that at that same park meeting, Ryan had shown her a photo from a boat ride with Gail and Rick. It was a picture of Gail in a bikini. "Look how hot she is," Ryan had said, staring at his own sister. He admitted he'd been staring at her in that way the entire day, and that Rick had noticed the inappropriate, predatory gaze fixed upon his wife. For Blakely and Rapper, the puzzle pieces slammed into place. The protective older brother was a monster with a motive. A twisted obsession and the rage of a man whose victim had escaped his control. But a witness's statement about a decade-old confession wasn't enough for a conviction. They needed more. They turned back to the family and the picture grew darker. Ryan's older sister Cheryl revealed they had been estranged for years following a bitter argument over their parents' veterans' benefits. But just after Ryan's recent unproductive police interview, he had called her out of the blue. "Life's too short," he'd said. "Blood is thicker than water," he wanted to make up. The timing was too convenient. It felt like a man shoring up his defenses. It was then that the detectives made a decision. When the detectives sat down with Cheryl and laid out the grotesque truth they'd learned from Chris, the childhood sexual abuse, the incestuous obsession, she was left speechless. The shock was a physical blow, leaving her sick to her stomach. She realized Gail had likely never told her because Gail knew Cheryl would have confronted Ryan immediately. The past began to rearrange itself in her mind, revealing a darker pattern. She recalled Ryan's bizarre behavior at the funeral. He had described the murder scene with a chilling, vivid clarity. A story of someone walking down the hallway and seeing Gail lying in bed, as if he were describing a dream or a memory. Then he had said the unthinkable. "You know, sometimes I wonder if I could have done this." At the time, Cheryl had dismissed it as the ramblings of a grief-stricken brother. Now it sounded like something else entirely. The picture of Ryan that came out from other friends and family was that of a deeply disturbed man. He had offered to sell Gail's waterbed, the very bed she was murdered in, to a family friend at a cheap price. He had gone through her personal mail after her death, finding and burning letters from other men, a final act of controlling possession. Another sister, Lynn, confirmed he had confessed to wishing he could apologize to Gail because he felt he had raped her, a feeling he'd allegedly repeated to one of his nieces. Even his stepson was not spared. Ryan had spoken to him about his sexual feelings for Gail, admitting that sometimes she would say no, so I would force her. Then there was the testimony of his Aunt Nava. She revealed that on the very day of the murders, both Gail and Ryan had called her to complain about each other. Gail was angry that Ryan owed her money for a car she had co-signed. Ryan was furious that Gail, with her new house and 20 acres, thought she was too good for the family. Their parents, living in an RV, had been forced to move it from Ryan's apartment parking lot. Ryan had asked if they could park on Gail and Rick's property. Gail had refused, not wanting the liability with her young siblings during ongoing renovations. At the funeral, Ryan had told Nava with cold certainty that if Gail and Rick had let their parents park on the land, they would still be alive. Then he had turned to her and asked the same question he'd asked Cheryl. "Do you think I would be capable of doing something like this?" The evidence was entirely based on circumstances, a mountain of creepy behavior and self-incriminating statements, but it was enough for Blakely and Rapper. They were certain Ryan was their man. What they needed was a crack in his foundation, his wife, Pam. They brought them in for another round of interviews separately. Ryan was rude and controlling, demanding to sit in on Pam's session. Pam, in contrast, was meek and mild-mannered, a woman who seemed to have spent a lifetime under someone else's thumb. Her interview lasted 3 hours, a slow, painstaking process of gaining her trust. Finally, she broke. The alibi was a lie. They had been home from the laundromat by 8 p.m. Ryan had left, returned to smoke weed and have sex, then left again, not returning until 9 the next morning. She claimed she had no idea where he was, assuming he was out dealing drugs to make ends meet. The reason for the lie was simple. Ryan had insisted for over 2 decades. He had drilled the false alibi into her, demanding she not only repeat it but believe it herself. He had reminded her of the story just before this very interview. Though she admitted the alibi was made up, she offered nothing more. The detectives were sure she was still holding back, trapped in the grip of a manipulative man who controlled every aspect of her life, from her children's homeschooling to the truth she was allowed to tell. By the end of the 3 hours, Ryan's patience had shattered. He began banging on the interview room window, demanding they release his wife. The performance was unhinged. They let Pam go and brought Ryan in. They confronted him immediately. They told him Pam had taken back the alibi. He denied it all, claiming the detectives were lying or that Pam was lying for reasons he couldn't understand. Then they went for the throat, asking about his relationship with his sister. "What do you mean?" he stalled. Detective Blakely fixed him with a cold stare. "You know exactly what I mean." After a long, awkward silence, Ryan offered a single damning phrase. "We were just 2 kids exploring. It was like doctors and nurses." He would say no more. The interview room door clicked shut and Ryan Weirden was gone, leaving behind the foul echo of his excuse. Just 2 kids exploring. It was like doctors and nurses. In the days that followed, his appearance of control crumbled into a series of unhinged voicemails left on Detective Blakely's phone. Over 30 messages swung between anger and a twisted appreciation. He called the detectives names, but also said they were a necessary evil. He accused them of bullying his wife into taking back the alibi. He strongly denied any knowledge of his sister's killing, while begging them to stop digging up childhood secrets. The man was coming apart at the seams, a pressure cooker ready to explode. Blakely and Rapper knew he had to be taken off the streets, but they needed one final solid piece. In January 2013, they went to Pam's workplace, catching her without Ryan's suffocating presence. Their message was simple and direct. They were cold case detectives. This was their only focus. They were not going away. They needed a resolution for Gail, for Rick, for the families who had waited a quarter of a century for answers. Something in their quiet determination broke through the wall of fear. Pam agreed to come in. This was the interview. Seated across from the two detectives, Pam began by stating for the record that she was not being threatened or forced. She was there of her own choice, and then she unburdened herself of a 25-year-old nightmare. She confirmed the laundromat, the return home by 8 p.m., and Ryan's disappearance. He had returned the next morning at 9 a.m., not with a quiet entrance but with frantic banging on her door. When she opened it, she found him crying, and he blurted out the confession that would chain her to him for life. "I killed Gail and Rick." Shock left her speechless. He explained he had gone to their house to argue about the family tensions, the RV parking, the money he owed for the car she co-signed. The argument grew heated, and Rick had ordered him to leave and never return. Ryan left but returned 20 minutes later with a trick. His car wouldn't start. He needed a jump. Rick, ever helpful, went out to his Blazer to get the cables. Ryan approached, gestured for him to roll down the window, and when Rick did, trusting the brother of his wife, Ryan raised a .22 caliber revolver and fired twice into the left side of his head at very close range. Then he walked into the house, into the main bedroom where Gail was sleeping, and shot her 3 times in the face. His reason was as petty as it was monstrous. Gail thought she was too good for her own family. Pam, reeling, told him to leave. He did, but that afternoon he called, pleading to see her. Reluctantly, she agreed. He picked her up with her 6-month-old son, but instead of driving to his apartment, he drove to the house on Ransom Street. He forced her from the car, gripping her wrist, and dragged her to Rick's Blazer, making her look at the slumped body inside. Then he pulled her into the house to the bedroom and forced her to look at Gail. "Isn't she so beautiful?" he asked, a grotesque question for a woman he had executed. Then came the threat, cold and direct. "If you tell anyone, I'll do this to you too." He took her back to his place, where his friend Jimbo stopped by for their usual coffee. Pam listened, frozen, as Ryan casually told about how his sister and her husband had been killed, a full day before their bodies would be discovered, and 30 hours before he would officially be told. After Jimbo left, as Pam asked to be taken home, he showed her the murder weapon and a bag of the clothes he'd worn, storing them in his car to get rid of later. On the drive home, he threatened her once more and carefully made up the false laundromat alibi she would be forced to repeat for the next 25 years. She had carried this horrible secret ever since. She attended the funeral. She mourned with the family, all while living in terror of the man who had confessed to a double murder, forced her to view the carnage, and then became her husband and the father of her children. She was another of his victims, trapped not just by fear for her own life but for the life of her infant son. He was a master of control. His control was absolute. He called her daily at work to monitor her. He isolated her from friends. He exploited the vulnerabilities left by her own abusive father. Even after her second interview, when she had only taken back the alibi, he had raged at her, calling her a traitor before shifting tactics to convince her the detectives had forced her and that he should sue them. A performance that directly came before his unhinged voicemail attack. But now, in this final freeing interview, as she unspooled the entire horrifying truth, his control was showing up in a frantic digital leash. His calls and texts bombarded her phone, over 100 attempts to reach her during the interrogation. To the detectives, this was more than just harassment. It was a clear and present danger. They had no intention of sending Pam back into that viper's nest. They also couldn't risk giving Ryan the opportunity to flee or destroy evidence. The time for patience was over. They moved to arrest him immediately. He was brought in, interrogated, and as expected, denied everything. He clung to the laundromat alibi, pretending not to know. The only thing he would admit was a single, agreed-to instance of penetration with his sister. A claim everyone in the room knew was a grotesque lie from a man incapable of admitting the truth of his lifelong abuse. From his jail cell, his manipulation continued. He sent Pam 29 letters, a desperate campaign to make her take it back. alternating between begging and threats, accusing the detectives of forcing her and her of betrayal. Ryan Weirden's trial began in March 2014. The Ottawa County Courthouse saw an influx of media and spectators. It was a stark contrast to the quiet town. District Attorney Laura Mitchell led the prosecution. She worked with Assistant DA Jacob Flynn. They argued a powerful three-part motive: festering jealousy for the middle-class life Gail and Rick had built, rage over Gail's refusal to help their family, and a towering, primal fear that Gail would finally reveal the incestuous abuse to her husband. The prosecution presented 60 witnesses. Pam Weirden was the star. Her testimony was a quiet, devastating telling. She recounted Ryan's confession. She described the forced tour of the death scene. She spoke of the quarter-century of threats. As Pam spoke, her voice steady but barely audible, Ryan's composure shattered. He rose in the courtroom. He yelled that she was a black-hearted, evil woman. Deputies had to physically remove him. DA Mitchell addressed the jury directly after Pam's testimony. "Pamela Weirden has lived with a monster," Mitchell stated. "She bravely unburdened herself. Now this court must unburden her in the memory of Gail and Rick from his grasp." Ryan's monstrous nature was further revealed. A fellow inmate, Daryl Kane, testified Ryan had boasted about the murders. He spoke of his sister Cheryl's relentless campaigning for justice. Referring to Pam, Ryan had sneered, "If I knew that woman was going to cause me so much trouble, I would have killed her a long time ago." He pretended to choke her. When Ryan took the stand, his testimony was rambling. It was a bizarre spectacle. The judge repeatedly had to steer him back. She pulled him from unclear tangents. He denied molesting Gail. He described 3 innocent and exploratory encounters. His timeline was a confused jumble. It involved impossible ages. It betrayed his lies. He claimed he wouldn't have cared, he said this, if Gail had told Rick. He attempted to take apart the prosecution's motive. He insisted Pam was lying. He claimed she wanted a divorce. He said the detectives had brainwashed her. Under cross-examination, he broke into tears. He portrayed himself as the victim of a conspiracy. It was led by his wife and sister. The defense scrambled. Veteran attorney Richard Halpern led their efforts. He worked with Diana Cole. They brought in an expert. The expert argued the car window was smashed by a crowbar. It was not a bullet. This was despite the prosecution's clear ballistic explanation. Halpern addressed the jury. "The physical evidence is simply not there," he claimed. "This entire case rests on the word of a scared woman and a distant memory." They pointed to the 2 unidentified fingerprints. These were from the original scene. They noted they didn't match Ryan. This was a last gasp. It suggested an unknown intruder. In a final desperate move, they floated a theory. It was about financial problems at Gail's work. They suggested a document had been removed from the scene. Flynn stepped up to counter. "Your Honor, this is little green men from Mars stuff," he scoffed. A company official took the stand. He calmly took apart the fantasy. He stated he had never seen such a document. He had never requested it. The prosecution dismissed the entire notion. It was a wild conspiracy theory. It had no connection to reality. Next, the defense tried to drag the old motorcycle gang theory back into the light. It was a transparent attempt. It aimed to cloud the jury's judgment. It used sensational, discredited noise. It was too little. It was too late. The evidence was a fortress. Ryan Weirden was trapped inside it. On March 28, 2014, the jury returned with its verdict. The courtroom was packed. Every seat was taken. Silence fell. The foreman announced, "Guilty on both counts of murder." A collective gasp went through the gallery. Then quiet sobs were heard from Gail and Rick's families. Cheryl Weirden clutched Rick's brother David. Tears streamed down her face. At his sentencing hearing the following month, Ryan Weirden took over the podium. He launched into a furious hour-long rant. He painted himself as the victim of a huge injustice. He grew teary. He pleaded to the room, "I'm a good man. Why has this happened?" But his performance was met with cold silence from the gallery. Rick's brother David then spoke. His voice was heavy with grief. It had lasted decades. He recalled the words of the priest at the funeral. "This is not the work of the Lord," the priest had said. "This is the work of the devil." David concluded his statement. "To that end, Ryan will be judged divinely." The holidays, the special times we used to only share with family, have been wiped away by Ryan, his anger, and his jealousy. Judge Margaret Hensley imposed the only sentence that fit the crime. It was 2 life terms in prison. It was without the possibility of parole. As the judge spoke, Ryan continuously interrupted. He accused the detectives of having mentally raped my wife. The judge's patience, like the community's, had been exhausted. She fixed the convicted killer with a steely gaze. She asked, "Do I need to bind and gag you, sir? We'll have the deputies go and duct tape you if that's what's necessary, but you're going to listen." The threat hung in the air. For the first time, Ryan fell silent. In the years that followed, he appealed his conviction 3 times. He took his case all the way to the Supreme Court. Every appeal was denied. The man who had controlled so many lives was now permanently controlled by the state. His freedom was a thing of the past. For the families, the long ordeal had reached a legal end. Gail's sister Cheryl, whose relentless pursuit of justice had helped seal his fate, stated simply, "We're done. We finally got him. He created the situation, and now he has to pay for it." Rick's brother David expressed a weary satisfaction. He said, "We are extremely pleased to have the justice my brother deserves. At least this gives us some closure in how it happened and why it happened." Only one voice disagreed with the chorus of closure. Ryan's mother, Dorothy, refused to believe her son was a murderer. To one officer, she offered a final stubborn denial. "I don't care. You're wrong." The Ottawa County of the 2000s was far removed from the trusting community of 1987. The Brink murders had left a permanent mark. Doors that were once routinely left unlocked were now secured with deadbolts. A deep-seated caution had replaced the old innocence. The case, once a source of terror, became a somber lesson. It highlighted the hidden dangers within seemingly safe communities. At community meetings, parents spoke about the before and after of the Brink case. Local historian Martha Jones noted in a Holland Sentinel interview that case changed everything. It took away a piece of our small-town soul. It forced us to confront that evil could live right next door. The cold case unit, with detectives like Dave Blakely and Venus Rapper, continued its work. The unit's success in solving the Brink case got national attention. It showed the power of renewed investigation. It underscored the importance of re-examining old evidence. It proved the value of persistence in obtaining hidden testimony. The case became a study for other cold case units. It demonstrated how human instincts and careful re-interviewing could crack seemingly unbreakable secrets. For Gail and Rick Brink, their dreams of a life and family together were tragically stolen. But their story, once a haunting mystery, now had an answer. The truth, buried for decades, finally came to light. The legal machinery had finished its work. The box in the file room could be closed for good. The ghosts of Gail and Rick Brink, after 27 years, could finally rest. Their memory, sustained by a loving family and a community forever changed, served as a poignant reminder. Justice, however delayed, can still be found. Thanks for being here and listening. Don't forget to hit the bell for our latest stories. Stay safe and take care of your loved ones.